Hi, I'm Ali Words, and this is Last Unrifled Yaw. Last Unrifled Yaw is a podcast where we have conversations about video art, experimental music, avant-garde literature, performance art, and the occult. If you or someone you know would like to be on Last Unrifled Yaw, please get in touch. Tim Grady is an artist designing a magical game called The Tower. We also talked about architects versus gardeners and the process of designing process. Hey everyone, this is Ali Words, and today we have Tim Grady. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, Tim?
Sure. Thanks for having me on the show, first of all. And my name's Tim. I'm a working artist. You can find my stuff at Mirth and Woe. That's MIRTHANDWOE at Instagram. I've been practicing magic since I was about 20 years old. Mostly these days, I spend a lot of time reading Buddhist stuff. But I've dipped my toes in a bunch of different traditions and really started out from unexpected sources. Was reading anthropological and sociological textbooks. That's about the quick and dirty version of who I am.
Okay. And then you've had a rather unusual project that has been going for a while
That's
now.
right.
What is
That's
it
right.
exactly?
So about 6 months, well, about a year ago, I got the idea of building a game that was based on the tarot. And I didn't really know where to take it. And I don't mean like the traditional European card games that use tarot. I wanted to kind of bend that idea back to its more, well, at least in the US, it's more contemporary meaning, which is a sort of mystical divination tool. But I was like, it would be really cool if people could play the tarot together as a divination tool and as a magical tool. And I also thought it'd be a really cool idea in a way to help newcomers. As I got back into the online world of magic, which I walked away from years and years and years ago because there were big personalities and toxicity. And it turns out they're still around, but there's a lot more people really that are just earnest practitioners and a lot of new people trying to learn. And I thought it'd be a cool way for people to learn because tarot is one of the first things they go to. The game works around a basic understanding of, I shouldn't say, let me rephrase that. The game works around a concept I picked up along the way. I don't think it was in, which one's that one? Meditations on the Tarot by Anonymous or Our Unknown Friend. But it might have been that one or Jodorowsky's. But it's the idea that the tarot is an alchemical transformation. And while it blows up in the tarot, at the same time, it's raining golden manna down from heaven in the background. Ultimately, the alchemist's experiment is successful. It just doesn't turn out the way they think it will, causing them to shed off old identities of male and female, so on and so forth. And about 6 months ago, I was listening to a podcast. I don't know if anyone's heard it, but it's called Rabbits. And it was really interesting. They were playing a game based on like these things they call life path cards. And it reminded me of something I did when I was traveling Europe. And sometimes I get stuck somewhere for a couple of days and I wouldn't have a lot of money and I'd have to kind of occupy my own time. So I come up with odd things like I'm going to watch this bird and follow it all day. I'm going to go after every woman in a black dress and just see where she goes. And those really turned out to be these amazing little mini adventures. And I kind of did it and loved it while I was over there. Came back when my job there ended and resumed normal life in the States and forgot about it until I heard that show Rabbits, where they were using these quote unquote life path cards. And I said, this is a really good way I could use the tower, the idea of the tower as a training device. So I started hammering out the rules with a bunch of people on a few different Discord forums and websites. Among them, the Occult Living Room, Faith Blind Council, a Green Mushroom Project, and more recently, a little bit with the DKMU, as we're just trying to find the ways that it will work for most people, because the idea is to keep it accessible and open for practitioners, especially new ones from any place. It's a great way to introduce them to working with other magicians or practitioners, whatever you want to call them. Usually I just call it practitioners because, names and titles and such. But it's a great way because a lot of people shy away. I did for years, shy away from group working for a number of reasons. And a game is a really nice container for it. It creates a temporary reality with very hard boundaries, hard lines, and it has a definite ending. So when people are worried about the idea of like, oh, but there'll be like energetic spillover or my karma or spirits that linger or however you want to say it, the temporary system of the game really helps to control that, especially when you start it and end it with intent. So that's the basic, how the game came about. We're in our current trials right now, running A/B testing. So I have 2 different groups running it, and we will see how that goes. There may be some more evolutions to come, but we really want to test for how does the sideways action affect the players. In other words, group workings, in my experience, have a little bit of that. So that is a real concern people have, and that's why it's put into a game. But we want to also see, like, can we really control that or control for that?
Can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
You said
sorry, I just rattled on for a minute.
No, I love that, but I want to, when you say something that I can't just like put a link to the description for people. I want to jump in and get clarification. You said sideways action. Sideways
action. So like when you're doing a solo operation, in my experience, there's always a little bit of sideways action. In other words, you want to manifest money, and you may, whatever system or operation you use to do that, it may come to you through sort of unexpected channels, and it may come with some unexpected consequences usually. And that's what I mean by sideways action.
All right.
A lot of times people will be like, well, I want a new house. And they're like, boom, I'm going to get this in their head. They don't stop the operation. They just do in their head. They're like, I'm going to come into the possession of a new house. And they don't have any money. They don't have anything. And suddenly, they find out their in-law wants to come move in with them and bring a big boat of money so you can get the house. And they're like, what crap? I didn't want to live with my, you know what I mean? But that's how that's
okay.
That's
unintentional side effects
that I'm talking about. And that multiplies when you have more people in. You got it. And that is what my experience has been. You get a little bit more of that with more people in the mix, and it's not always bad. And that's why I'm looking to control for it. Like, while it's wonky, it's also this sort of liminal effect that I think that if you turn it well, you can really magnify the experience for people instead of letting it kind of manifest in completely uncontrolled ways. But we'll see. So
okay. So the structure, what's the title of this game?
The game is called The Tower. It's a 3-month game. You have really one move each day, and you work through levels in the tower to get to the end. People can drop out whenever they want, and there's no penalty. That's written into the rules. But ultimately, the tower works as a sort of almost wish engine. You're collectively pouring energy into an operation and gaining meaning from it. And in that process, kind of getting deeper and deeper and deeper into it. And in the final end, they take that, all the players that are remaining take all that collective energy and essentially dedicate their merit or their power or direct it towards whoever won the game for one wish they made at the very start of the game. There's nothing to say you can't play it again. And there are some side benefits accrued along the way, smaller boons and stuff like that. But that's the ultimate sort of goal of the tower. There's a smaller version of it called the Garden Party, which is a 1-day, almost kind of like a speed run, or more correctly, you play one level in 1 day, which is able to be done because it's asynchronous. The game you don't have to have like, it's my turn, it's your turn. But we can talk a little bit more about that if you'd like explanation of the game. The game's short rules. I can also send it to you if you want to post it.
It'd be good to have a link.
Through.
And then I would like to hear a little bit more about the rules, but now I have to ask, how competitive is it? It almost sounds like everyone's competing to have their own wish. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Now, this is the sort of yes and no. So I've always found that magic's intensely personal, and despite what people say, I've also found that it's intensely moral. And by that, I don't mean that it's necessarily left hand or right hand path. I don't really believe in any of that, but the intense questions and things that it deals with are things that kind of they linger and lurk around that good and bad areas in our heart, where we weigh those things. So the game is designed with very few explicit rules. Players can collaborate round by round to try and advance faster or advance more quickly. They can also deceive each other. It doesn't say one way or the other. It does say that essentially the game facilitator will reward good, like honest agents, and will not say, I wouldn't say punish, but challenge those that are also trying to hinder the path for others. But I really wanted to leave it open for people to experience it how they want to experience it. Similarly, because I don't really believe in that sort of left hand or right hand path stuff. There's a time that lying can save lives. There's a time that telling truth can kill in life. So it really leave it open, but the players can cooperate and they all get some benefit regardless at the very end. But there is one that will be sort of primarily chosen, but that's also part of the game. So what you'll see as when we talk about the rules kind of put the judgment into the player's hands. It how do I say this? It encourages collaboration. But players can, again, it's their journey to make their own experience with. And as best I can do it, the tower is designed to return to them what they put into it. So
hopefully they put what they want or what's good for them anyways, maybe not what they want.
Right. Well, because that's right. That's one of those things. Like, I think that at the beginning, somebody learning, let's just take the obvious example. Somebody who's learning, and I'm thinking of more often a young male practitioner, but it could be anything these days. But they'll be like, everyone will be like, whatever you do, don't summon a succubus. And like, I don't care. You get people to be honest. 90% of the younger male, they're like, that's like the first thing I did, right? You're going to, if you go down that road, it's not necessarily right or wrong. You're just going to learn something.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah. So that's you're going to learn something. So I don't really want to take those choices away from people, but I would like to create a space where they can learn to play with that and learn what's best for them without me saying it. Like the encouragement for collaboration even is difficult. It does encourage it, but there's a point at which essentially the players have to guess whose tail is whose tail, right? But and who told it best, but they don't know who the judge is yet, and the judge changes every round, so they can't like custom craft their tale to be like, I know the high priestess is going to judge this round. I'm going to tell my tale in a way the high priestess would appreciate. They all tell their tales, and then the judge is revealed.
With that in mind, it sounds like maybe we should hear a little bit more of the structure of the game, which is fine. Sure. So there's probably a better order to explain it, but what I've picked up, just to summarize, is that people are telling stories, they're telling tales every round. I don't know where the rounds fit in. And then there's maybe a different person each time who judges these stories. But if you had to
there's a different, yeah.
Just to introduce someone to the rules that maybe isn't the best place to start, how would you explain it?
I would say this: each player, it's ideally played by 9 players. Doesn't have to be, but I try to use 9 as a sort of anchor point, both because I think it represents the tower in the sense that you're about the culmination of a thing resets it to 10. But also, just I found that working in a repeating number can often strengthen an operation. So 9 levels, 9 turns per level, 9 players. You can play with more, you can play with less, but each player is going to essentially, after they've got a particular wish in mind and speaking an invocation, they're going to draw a tarot card or have one handed to them if they were playing in person. And they take a look at it, but they don't tell anyone else what it is. They'll let the DM obviously know what it is, or if it's in person, the DM or the caretaker in this case knows what it is. The caretaker is then going to give them a picture and say, hey, listen, based on that card, this is the picture I want you to work with. Right, in person. If not, you can send it electronically. They can draw it electronically and show it to you as the caretaker or DM in this case. And then based on that card, the person running the game will give them a specific picture to work with. For the online version, I'm working with AI generated pictures because I just think it's really cool. The images are somewhat indistinct and often crammed with lots of different stuff. And then the player focuses on something in that card that draws their attention. And with the tarot card that they drew in mind, they really try to be like, what's this picture showing me? And then for the rest of the day, they chase that. They chase whatever it was. So if you looked at a picture and it was all candles and drapes, but right in the corner there was this goblet and it kept drawing your attention, that would be the thing that you're going to focus on all day. You're going to chase however that means to you, whether it means you go goblet shopping, whether it means you keep an eye out for goblets, whether it means you be really mindful about goblets for the whole day. But whatever that means to you, you're going to kind of chase that goblet for the day. After you've had some sort of experience, whether it's, fireworks and, oh my God, that was amazing, or it was something very small and, well, it made me, an abstract realization, you're going to write that story down without referring to either the tarot card or the picture you were given. You can say what the object is. And then all the players essentially tell their tales without knowing what each other's cards are. At that point, the DM will put down all the cards and also pull out one card from the major arcana that acts as the judge. And the judge is going to pick the story based on the way they see the world. So in other words, the judge would, high priestess again, would see it with the sensibilities of a high priestess. The world card would judge the stories with the sensibility of the world card. So the players have an opportunity to vote on which one they think did best under that umbrella of the judge, and they're free to assign different picture and people's original card combos or their patrons to a particular story. Now, if all agree, or the majority, I think I put all? I think it had to be more than half. Yeah, let me double check. It's more than half agree. No, this is one of the changes I went back and forth when talking about it with different people. If the players agree that one person did it the best, or at least 2/3 of them do, in other words, 6 out of 9, their election wins. But if not, the judge picks up. The judge's choice becomes the valid one for who moves, like which one was the best story, depending on if they all got the right answer because they collectively, or not right answer. Let me rephrase that. If they all collectively voted for the same one or close to the same one, they all receive a boon to go on to the next round. If not, the judge makes their selection, and the one who wins, the one that gets selected, gets a bigger boon. So this is where I was trying to say, like, you can play it different ways. You can play cooperatively, but you can also play in a sense of highly competitive if that's what you want, and that's for people to begin to play with and figure out for themselves. And that's essentially the order of play before they move on to the next round. The judge final clue given to them, but they collect all the clues and those become part of a riddle at the 9th gate, which I couldn't help myself also, 9th gate, because of the movie, but I'm just shitty puns like that made me laugh. So that's essentially how play advances. Whether they do it together and each kind of really try to hammer out, okay, this is what we think was the best tale, which helps them really think about magicking, as well as having experiences, or whether they kind of are at odds, and they have to deal with what fate, so to speak, gives them. So yeah, basic order of play, more or less.
That's interesting. It's interesting because it both encourages people to identify like new omens, so to speak, each day, but then it also encourages them after they've done whatever it is they're going to do to adopt most likely a different perspective in terms of how they judge their own and I guess other people's ways they approached the omen that they came for themselves.
Exactly. And I think that at the end of the day, like, at least for me, and I don't know, I didn't really come up in a tradition. I read more about magic, as I said, from almost a textbook angle. I think my first brush with it was the mythologist Joseph Campbell, and then that led to Fraser, that led to Jung. I didn't even really get into reading magic stuff till I was in my early 20s. But the ideas were already there, so I've always kind of looked at it with this view that it's not so much the drapery of any tradition that's important, it's the sort of underlying principles, and those have to do, as far as I can tell in my own practice, have to do with your perception, energy, interaction, ideas of concreteness or fluidity, and observation. And really, the game's designed to challenge that from others' perspective as well. Constantly sort of take these different positions of thinking. Because I think that for me, that's a lot of magic, and also becoming sure about what your own is while you're doing that. And that's that sort of double-edged or that tightrope walk I think most practitioners experience at some point, which is being really grounded in their own belief, but at the same time being really grounded in the idea of, I don't know, whatever works for you, and there's a tightrope there to be able to be walked. And if you fall off on one side of it, you kind of flip flop forever. If you fall off on the other, you become sort of a didactic tyrant telling everyone how they ought to practice.
Now I have to ask, especially given that question, have you considered what the tower would be like if you used other oracle systems or maybe groups of gods or other symbols?
I think it would work equally well. I think for my own practice, I think as long as I'd stayed consistent with, and this is part of the A/B testing, I've actually changed the invocation for 2 different groups. I have thought about using the Thoth deck for one and the Rider Waite for another, just again, but that was like too many. I already have enough variables going, so I figured I would start there. But I think that it could be work equally well with a set of runes. I think it could be set with throwing sticks in the air if that's your thing. I do ink blots and a lot of my artwork. If you really look at it, you're like, oh my God, he just made a swing and carved out the image. I think it could work equally well for anything. The tarot is, again, I picked it because it's one of those it's a common denominator in a lot of traditions. People will be like, oh no, I only do Egyptian, but I also work with tarot, or I only do Norse, but I also work with tarot, right? So it's this sort of common denominator. It's also an entry gate. And for the evolution of the game, as I see it, maybe 2 or 3 generations away, I think there's a place for the sort of archetypes of the cards to make the game more complex and interesting. But again, we're gonna run through the first trials first and see what happens.
All right. So it sounds like you have in mind ways that you would alter the gameplay. Would it fundamentally change, or like would the core gameplay loop still be like following these omens and then telling stories and judging them, or?
Yeah, I think that the storytelling aspect is key, but I do think that there's a place for roles. I noticed in my own practice that you can go through periods where, right now, like I keep picking up the Queen of Pentacles, whether I want to or not. And I'm like, last time I got it, I think I posted on my home Discord of, WTF, this again, not because it's a bad card, but it just keeps coming. And I think that there may be over the course of 91 days, I'll be taking the data, or 90 days, I'll be taking the data of the flop, so to speak. Um, and I think in that process, I suspect in that process, you may see distinct trends arising. In other words, players kind of getting stuck in a group of cards or pathways to play. And while I don't want there to be like character classes, I suspect that those will emerge. And because you're working with tarot archetypes, they'll probably be related to them. So you may have somebody who plays more as a trickster, or you may have somebody who plays more as a knight errant.
Like depending on the cards they keep getting, is that what you mean?
Not only the cards they keep getting, but as that may shape them, and that's a little bit of my own sensibility too. But yeah, it's the cards they keep getting. But my own sensibility has always been that when operations work for me the best, there comes a point somewhere in the operation where the operation itself kind of begins shaping me and giving me information, and I've got to kind of open and ride with it. Like, the wave has been set up, it's moving along, and I can surf it and go with it, or I can keep trying to hammer in my own direction that I originally had. And the most interesting ones are when I ride that wave. I suspect the same thing will happen, but that's part of what I want to see is like, so if somebody keeps getting these certain sorts of cards, their play style may change. And you may have these sort of unofficial classes starting to develop, or ways to play it develop. And at that point, it'll begin evolving. In other words, there may be new mechanics put in, new boons for different rounds, new challenges for different things players might do. For instance, if I figure out as the caretaker, playing the role of the caretaker, like 3 rounds in a row, somebody's basically duped all the others into picking the wrong, like disagreeing because they feel like their stories are the best to be judged. You know what I mean? Or they're just trying to mislead them to get to a certain point. There may be a new mechanic set up where they have to, oh my God, you have to pick up 2 cards today. And you have to reconcile them. Or there's, you get your card. Oh yeah, this is fun. I picked up the, 5 of Pentacles. And then like there's a flop of cards that might be off to the side where I'd be like, yeah, you got the 5 of Pentacles and death. So have fun with that journey today. But that's all stuff that's iterations down the line. Again, I think I want to see what happens because it's a larger operation. For a group, it's also a larger operation in duration. And a lot of practitioners do I did a spell for 20 minutes. And that's cool. I do a lot of those. But they shy away from things, or they don't think of things in terms of that longer view until they've done a bit. And this is a chance for them to jump into that sort of longer 90-day ritual.
All right. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your other art.
Yeah. So the rest of the art, I started, other stuff I started doing about 7 years ago. I was in a car accident, if you want to call it that. I crashed a car. I don't really remember much about it. But it was like a big turning point in my life. I'd had a string of really bad relationships. I was, using far too many chemical alterants, so to speak. But after that, it just caused me to sort of reassess my life, and I started making art, which I hadn't done really visual art since I was a teenager. And for whatever reason, I just started gravitating towards black and white art only. And I noticed that I kept drawing the same style of things. And I wanted to kind of just be like, well, maybe that's just where my head goes. But the more I began doing them, I began to realize that they were working essentially the way path working does for a lot of people. I would end up sometimes with a revelation, sometimes talking to, for lack of a better term, an entity, sometimes through working through a manifestation in creating the art. So nowadays, most of the time, what I'll do is I'll be working at something or thinking about something, usually with a magical or metaphysical bent, and an image jumps into my brain, and I begin sketching it, and that sketching then becomes carved, and so to speak. Ultimately, I'd like to start carving them out. I think that's why I always say carving. I want to start carving them out of stone as well, but for now they're almost all black and white digital, and usually at some point in the process, it goes from sort of the organic inspired creation to a more structural. I want to capture a feeling of liminality in the image, because I want to reuse it as an anchor and come back to a spot, or to an idea, or to a particular entity that works that way. I guess in the same way, and many people may think of sigils working, although I found that, the standard method where people, masturbate onto the sigil is it's great if you're brand new, but there's, I'm in my 40s, sex is awesome, orgasm is awesome, but it's not the most powerful thing in the world. Concentrating on an image for 10 hours while you're trying to perfect it and make the lines super clean and make it super, all of that is energy that you're pouring in to a piece. And oftentimes I've had far better results with that than the sort of more traditional method.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I think me too. I don't normally do traditional sigils. They can work, but there's just a lot more than that. And also, if you are using erotic energy and you're not trying to manifest something erotic,
Right.
there's like a weird dissociation between trying to maintain that erotic energy on something that isn't erotic. And you can
Right,
eroticize
exactly.
anything, but you're not
And some people,
necessarily into anything.
right. And some people, I know there are people out there that approach magic that way. They're like, I'm going to fuck everything. Excuse my language, but like they take that to everything. That's just not who I am, but not to judge it either. But I found the same thing, is that you kind of want things to resonate. And I think that the black and white abstractions, you can always tell what I'm doing almost all the time, but it's not, they're stylized kind of, I'm not an art major, so I may be speaking out of turn, but they're a little bit either Art Nouveau or Art Deco, very, very, stark lines, dramatic, some people have said, but I found that it's a cleaner, like I can go a lot of different places with it. It doesn't bring, as you said, that erotic energy, that resonance wants to go somewhere. Whereas I have a little bit more freedom with what I'm creating. Also, sometimes, it's the same thing too, is you can like put on a different music while you're working, or you can put yourself into a different environment. I've drawn in the heat, I've drawn in the cold, I've drawn in the dark, I've drawn in water, which is not a great idea if you're a digital artist, but I've done it to try to capture some of that resonance.
Interesting. Now, what I'm really interested in is what happens when an artist moves from their organic inspiration, where they're behaving subconsciously, or they're just in the zone and they're not really thinking about what they're doing. But then you described how you eventually, at least for some of the pieces, transition into making conscious decisions about it. I'm not sure if imposing a structure has the right connotation for you.
Yeah,
But
I think so. It goes back. I started I didn't do visual art for years. I was a creative writing teacher. I wrote, like so many creative writers in college. I was published in zines, which no longer even exist, and I can't remember the name of, because they opened up for like 3 months. People were like, "We're gonna make a thing," and then it would change. I think I'm in a few anthologies with really, really short stories. But I got real into this idea of, and I think it was the scholar John Gardner who said it, but like there's gardeners and there's architects when it comes to stories. A gardener kind of it might have been Stephen King, actually. I think it was Stephen King. And gardeners kind of excavate. They move the dirt away to find the beauty that's already there and let it grow wild. Architects, sit down with a drawing and a map, and they like figure out all the plot details before they ever start writing anything. And when I started teaching writing, I really believed I was just a gardener. But as I worked with others, I began to see how most of us are a little bit of both. We may start out in one and transition to the other, but there comes a point in the work where there's a sort of key quality or dominant motif that surpasses either the architect's plans or the gardener's prize roads. And once that emerges, you can kind of bounce back and forth to accentuate a detail or to bring life to something and investigate it further. It really becomes playful at a point. Like, oh, I don't know, let's amputate a character's arm, see what that does to the scene, that sort of thing. And that's essentially what happened in my art really quickly. And I only think it's because I was writing for a long time. So I was, without knowing it, I was on the lookout for that feeling of playfulness where you're still going after that organic thing, but you're also like, I wonder what would happen if I threw this up there, or oops, I made an eraser mark. Maybe it was a happy accident. Let's go with it, you know? And those sort of structural pieces, I think are for me are essential. They allow me to focus. They allow me to harden a thing. It also allows it for me in a way, especially as a magical artist, if I can use that term, to put my thumbprint on what for me is almost like a wild photograph of something that happened in my head, heart, or other senses. I get to frame it. I get to choose this line, or I get to bend it a little bit more this way or that way. Sometimes it goes its own way, though. I was doing a Veve for Papa Legba for a friend in the DKMU, and I wanted it to go one way, and it didn't want to go that way, and I could not bend it to go that way, or you know what I mean. It didn't want to go that way, and I had to kind of go, all right, let's sit back, take it. I took another few days and listen to what it's trying to tell me, and then structure my thumbprint in differently. But it's conversation with a piece. And I think that's for me, that's the exciting part of art, you know, as the artist. Like, yeah, I want people to like it, and I like to sell more art. That's always fun and nice. But the exciting part, the thing that keeps me going, is like when that conversation's happening, when the whole world around me could be burning and I'm sitting there going, but why won't you be the drawing I want you to? Like, there's something intense about that moment, and cool.
Yeah, for sure. That's a very interesting explanation of it. I'd heard of the gardener versus architect dichotomy thrown around before, but I'd never thought about it in terms of other media. And I think that is definitely worth something to keep in mind listening to all the interviews in this series, because a lot of the questions I end up asking, I think I I do both, but I
Right.
find that it's harder to learn from gardeners
Yeah. Oh,
because
yes.
yeah, and I kind of want the show to be something where people that want to make unusual things can listen and learn. And when you listen to the gardeners, a lot of the time they give you like attitudes and emotional explanations, whereas a
Right.
lot of the architects are like, I used these schemas for these reasons, and here's how I
Right. Right.
executed it. And I actually talked about it last episode a little bit in different words, in terms of how much of a word person someone is, because like
Yeah.
interviewing a musician who doesn't like a performer as opposed to a composer,
Right.
um, yeah,
They're going to think
interesting.
about things in different ways. They're going to articulate that differently.
Yeah,
I,
the improvisers are going to articulate how they feel when they improvise, whereas the composers are going to explain their music theory.
I think one of the things that, like, it's really interesting. I wrote a couple of papers on like how schema work in art and how they work with a brain and how they create narrative captivation and stuff like that. And one of the things that was became clear in that process, at least for me, as a working writer at the time, and now I'm more of a visual artist, and you know, I make operations and characters and stuff like that. Was that it's very similar to what like other people talk about zones. Like if I want to increase the weird, I got to get into not a personal zone. I don't mean my own flow. I mean, I have to kind of put myself in sort of somewhere liminal that's going to spark that creative mindset that the gardeners kind of allude to or want to passionately talk about. But I can do it with the sensibility of an architect or engineer. In other words, yeah, you're having a hard time being inspired. Go up into the mountains and go live around some bears. I bet you it's going to make you start thinking, especially if you leave some food out.
For
You know?
sure. It just makes me think
Um,
of William Blake, what you're describing, who is theoretically someone that I absolutely adore because it's that intense imagination within highly structured forms, especially when you think about how
yeah,
he made his illuminated manuscripts, where they're like acid etched into plates that are then pressed on other things. It was a huge amount of work over like a number of years just to make a single work.
right. And there's something, and then that process, for me at least, that process becomes its own. It's its own work. Like people, you know, it's. I think that's a difference too. Sometimes when we talk about sort of or talk with gardeners, it's hard for them to articulate the process and the joy of process. They'll talk about how intense it is and how they're into it, but that what I hear them identifying and what I've seen in myself and those I've worked with to teach is the process becomes the thing more than the product at the end. And if for me, if I don't kind of get into that, then I get unhappy, right? Because I'm so focused on the result. I'm so focused on the product. And I'm sitting there with a mind that is like projecting falsely too. Like it thinks like, oh, I can see how this is going to turn out in 102 steps. That shit's never been right. If that's right, I would be a billionaire already. You know what I mean? Like I would be projecting stock quotes. Be like, in 102 days, this is going to be $1 million. I'm buying all that. You know, things go in their own direction.
For sure. And,
Yeah.
I am really big into getting into the process. And I often refer to the results of the process as just the aesthetic residue and that the actual art was the
I
process
love
of its
that.
creation.
Yeah.
But
It's absolutely.
but then what it makes me really care about is the process that leads to that process. So like I'm an architect for designing the process that I will play within, if that makes
Right.
sense. Like I specifically,
Yes.
and you've kind of done that with your game, is you've architecturally composed a system that within it, it's extremely organic. You draw these tarot cards, you interpret a symbol from a picture, you find anything in your experience, and then you turn it into a spoken word piece that then gets judged not by your own. Well, I guess it is still judged by your own perceptions, but is filtered through a tarot card.
Right. Filter through a tarot card and also, and that's like that sort of, in a way, it's almost a mirror room, right? Like, so you have, that's where you're talking about, like, it's forcing you to take others' perspectives, not just the card that you drew and the card of the judge, but you're looking at each other's tales and kind of going, what's this weird thing I'm involved with? And how do they interpret their weird thing? And am I interpreting my weird thing the right way? Is my weird thing too weird? Right. But it's that forced perspective taking as part of a process that I hope acts as a sort of part of the weird generator, right? Like, is like, can you create these sort of weird synchronicities? In other words, maybe two players draw the same two cards 2 rounds in a row. I guarantee you, even though they're talking online, they're going to start having conversations or thinking about that other player, like, what's going on with me? So you want to set up that sort of loose framework, but at the same time create these like little hot zones of weirdness that can jump up in it and maybe even break the form. You know what I mean? Like, cool. That's not a bad thing. The tower blew up early. Yay, manna from heaven. You know what I mean? Like, cool.
Yeah. All right. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask?
I think that one of the things I would, and I just, talking with what you work with, I'm super interested in is like, what are your keys to weird? Because that's for me always the thing. I'm always like, increase the weird. Whatever you're doing, increase the weird. Like if you want to get magical, increase the weird. You want your power to be more, increase the weird. You want your work life to be better, increase the weird. Bring a remote control car to work. I don't know, whatever. Right? Do something. So I kind of like, what are the things that you do to kind of increase that weird in your own processes, or the things that you found that work?
I don't know.
And
I
you can think
guess,
about it too. I mean, yeah, it's
yeah,
just,
no one's ever asked me that. And I feel like you might be using the word weird in multiple ways also, which,
I am.
okay, yeah, that's fine.
Right.
It's fine.
Yeah.
Well, I think my go-to for any medium at this point is Buto. Like partway through, whether I'm making music or a visual image, lately most of my visual work is video, so it's also temporal, it's also moving. But also the books I write involve Buto or can be interpreted that way. Um, I'll stop partway through the creation process and I will dance literally and metaphorically with whatever it is. Um,
Yeah.
One thing that I do is I make sure not to do too much work in a given day on a single project. I'll work on like many things. I'll be reading like many books, but especially if I'm writing a magical book, um, I won't. There are some exceptions, like if it's a channeled text, but if it's something
Right.
that I am using occult philosophy to construct, I need to contemplate and process and work with whatever energies go with each thing. Like I have a book called Suburban Butofu. It's a choose your own adventure grimoire, and each stop it'll say like the first one is crossroads, right? And there'll be a little entry that describes in the second person you approaching the crossroads, and then there'll be a little ritual for doing a Buto dance of the crossroads. And then there'll be a list of other parts in the network you can go to, like go north takes you to earth, or go south takes you to fire, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I specifically only wrote one entry a day. And for me, there's something about sleeping between the steps of something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I
It's
don't,
the, it's, I was just gonna say, it's like that proverbial dive. I always use the term diving down. You're like, except you're, instead of coming up for air, you're going back down for more something.
yeah. I think the subconscious mind just needs time to process. And there's a lot of like mental defragging that happens when you sleep, if you sleep well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
find the
That
same
makes
thing with
perfect
music
sense.
composition too, is if I try to write more than one piece, probably a month, um, I'll get multiple things that might be like technically competent, but I
Yeah.
really want each thing to be distinct and do something different from anything else I've done before. And if you go too
Yeah. Yeah.
quickly, you just don't get that. So I guess that's how
Yeah.
I get the weird as I
Yeah. I
go
love it.
slow and I sleep.
No, what was it? I have a friend who is a practitioner, and uh, smooth is slow and slow is fast. You know, that we get to that place we want to get to faster. And it's also a musician, by the way. Um, but we get to that place that we want to faster if we just slow down. Just slow it down. Don't try to uh, jam it full of fireworks, which it's such a counterculture message in a way to the world we live in these days, right? Everything fast now, better, quicker, stronger. Um, so I really love that approach, and I'm gonna steal from that and consciously do that. I found I do a lot of the same stuff, but I've never really done it consciously. I'm just so ADHD. I don't stick to anything for more than like 20 minutes at a time. I'm like, oh, what? Oh, geez, a squirrel. Okay.
Another thing I do that is kind of evident from my books, and I think it's applicable to anyone in any field, is that especially if you're taking that sleep approach, you can seed your subconscious mind, or I guess your conscious mind too, with whatever material you want to unintentionally use to understand the world around you and especially the projects that you're working on. So the reason you made me think of William Blake is I've been reading an analysis of his work Jerusalem,
Yeah.
and I'm reading it alongside um, some Mesoamerican codices like the Codex Borgia and um, Codex Dresden. I haven't really gotten to the Dresden. I mean, I've looked at it, and just a lot of media that I fit into the same category. And by reading all these books, and if you look at each of my books except for the first one, there'll be a list of like probably at least 10 books in there
Sure.
that were the things that I was immersing myself in, the pieces of which allowed me to construct whatever's the book. So that's sort of like the meta level process of the process.
It's like staged cross pollination almost. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I'm reading these 3 books, and they're going to kind of shape each other in that process over a series of days by giving them time to steep and rotate. And I like that. I like that a lot. I find it's funny. That's kind of like what we were talking about earlier. Like, in a way, it's very structured, but in a way, it's very wild as well.
Yeah. And sometimes it happens unintentionally. Like back when I was first learning 3-dimensional chess, and since then I've written a book on 8-dimensional chess. I was also practicing with nunchucks and Rubik's cubes.
Yeah.
And I realized that they all 3 contain the same kind of motion.
That
So
circular spiraling, right?
yeah, and like when you're moving pieces in 3 dimensions, especially I'm doing it with my hand right now. Like the knight might go up 3 boards and then forward 1 square is the same as like whipping the nunchuck around or like rotating the right hand side of your Rubik's cube. And you can learn to manipulate Rubik's cubes, nunchucks, and 3-dimensional chess following. You can do more in the 3D chess, but following the same basic kinds of organizations. So like whatever things you do, they all seep in, including things that you don't want, like whatever job you have, if you have a job that has influences you don't want. So you can very carefully construct the kind of creativity that you'll have by everything that you do, everything that you watch, everything that you hear.
I love that. I love that. I think there's a level of sort of mindfulness. I think sometimes, especially with the background in Buddhism, or there's even that popular notion of it. People think mindfulness is the sort of static, passive state. And I found it's more like cooking, and that's kind of what I was thinking of as you were describing that. Like when you really become mindful of the things you're working with, you're working the whole time, but you can shape it. It doesn't mean that you're just sitting back there going, I'm mindfully observing the universe, which is also true. But there's also a sort of engaged activity, or even super activity, was what you're saying, is where you begin to make these connections and you see these things and be like, oh, here's the pattern. It's like I think it was Miyamoto Musashi in the 5 Rings. Like, when he masters one thing, he masters 10,000 things.
I'm sorry, what is that from?
I think it was the Book of 5 Rings by Musashi. Is like sort of this Japanese swordsman who retired to a cave after, like, I don't know, single-handedly killing tons of dudes, to meditate on what he'd done and the art of swordplay. And in it, he's commenting on sort of what happens when you become a master of something. And that in understanding the sword and the way sword fighting is done, you will understand a whole bunch of other things too, because those dynamics, the underlying dynamics, you'll see play out. I think he uses an analogy to a carpenter also, like a master builder.
Mm-hmm.
Will see things that in government and in gardening and understand them, even though he's only worked with building his whole life, but he understands them at such a deep level. He sees the universal principles engaging.
For sure. Yeah, that's the idea of almost hermeticism, theoretically, is you could if you had some sort of hermetic idealized mind, you could look at anything and understand everything.
Right. And I think I that's one of the things I think is so cool about the age we live in, that we don't, the further down the path we go, and the only other thing I read besides like, so I read, if you want to know my like reading list, it's involved in like weird anthropological texts, a few occult books, and system dynamics and pulp fiction. but I but I see these sort of cross patterns between storytelling, system dynamics, ancient truths, and I think that while our modern world has got so many freaking problems, it's also got so much exposure to information, things that 100 years ago, unless you lived near a university, you weren't reading these books. Unless you were involved in a super small set of mathematicians, you weren't talking about game theory or the predecessors of it. So I think it's an interesting world we're walking into.
For sure. Yeah. I always hear about people talking about how the internet is ruining our attention spans and making people not care about their education. But for the people that do care, you can get basically any book on any topic, probably for free. And then for the few that you can't, you might be able to convince a library to get it or buy it potentially.
Absolutely. And besides, the only thing the internet did is it put the crazy that was on the inside on the outside. You know what I mean? They're like, nobody has any attention span. Well, nobody had any attention span before. They were just sitting quiet in the meeting going, Bob's an asshole. I hate Bob. Now they're on their phone texting it.
Right.
Well, listen, I've got to wrap up here. I got to get back to dad duty, I think, in the next few minutes here.
All right. Do you have anything that you'd like to plug before you go?
If you're interested, take a look again at my Instagram, Mirth and Woe. If you're interested in that, just DM me for prints. Those can be, again, I can blow them up to almost any size. And if you really wanted to, I can get them etched into things. But, in the future, we're looking at cutting them into stone and pouring metal into them because I'm into like doing alchemical art. So that's what I'm playing around with. But yeah, that's it. Other than that, check out my online homes, the Faith Blind Council, if you're into this sort of stuff, particularly the Green Mushroom Project, or any of those podcasts in that network.
All right. It's been great having you.
It's been great being here, man. Thanks so much.